I stopped having sex. Basically, I needed to reset my whole sexuality. So I stopped having sex for a while, and I really started exploring what made me feel good, what was my pleasure. Because when I was having sex before, it was all about the other person and trying to get them to love me. It had nothing to do with what I wanted. I wasn't experiencing pleasure out of it. And I had quite a bit of sex and I didn't enjoy much of it. But when I took that break and I was able to sort of recalibrate, I came back with a sense of self-worth that I hadn't had before. And then again, with some supportive partners that knew about my experience, it made a world of difference for me. But really taking that break from it was key for me. Again, I think like Jasmyn said, I support everybody's decision to be sexual or not to be sexual. It's everybody's body. But for me, I needed that break.
So I think it is true. A healthy sex life is possible after sexual trauma, but I do believe in many cases it does take work, which I'm sure we'll get into in the following questions.
Hi, I believe that eventually it is possible.
I absolutely believe it's possible to have a healthy sex life after sexual abuse, but it's very complicated. It's not a simple answer of is it or isn't it? It takes a lot of work. For me personally, I had to do a lot of soul searching, a lot of self-discovery to really figure out what my boundaries were in order to have that healthy sex life that I craved and wanted, and now can thankfully say that I do have. But it took me years.
So yes, I did. I am no longer going through a phase of unhealthy behaviors, but I hypersexualized myself after my abuse. I slept with more people than I wanted to because I feel like I had disconnected my sense of self from my sexuality. And I think that that was something that I had to work on extensively through therapy. And it wasn't until I went to therapy for sexual trauma that I realized that I had disconnected myself from my sexuality, and I had to reintegrate those two parts of me into one whole. That being the case, piggybacking off of what I just said, one of the biggest things that really shocked me into addressing those unhealthy patterns or behaviors was that I made a list of individuals that I slept with. And my therapist had asked me, how many of those people did you actually want to give your body to? And I would say it was only maybe 10% of that entire list. And so that's what started my journey to recovering from sexual abuse in terms of improving my sexual health and sexual life.
I went through a lot of self-destructive behavior as well. Because I was sort of taught that sex was the only way that I could be loved. And so I searched for that for a long time and putting myself in a lot of dangerous situations and situations that I didn't really want to be in. But that's what I was taught. And so that's what I believed. I just believed that that's all that I was worth. And it's taken me a lot to get out of that pattern. I'm not saying that I don't do those things, but I'm definitely better than I was. I know I have more self-worth than that. And so I try to think about things before I do them, and try not to be as self-destructive.
I definitely went through a period of time where I had unhealthy sexuality in regards to my sexual abuse. I hypersexualized myself, just like a lot of us, all of us have been talking about. I think for me, I was abused very young. That was the first time I was abused. And so I think my boundaries were really lacking. I didn't know what was wrong, what was right. I think I said no, it wasn't listened to. So I thought, well, hey, if I just say yes, I'll never be raped again. I can just keep saying yes and things will be okay. And I touched on this on a previous panel when we were talking about hypersexualization, because it was a big, big hurdle in my healing process. And I wrote a couple of notes about this just because I thought this was such a key question. And I want to say, you know, when I say I put myself in dangerous situations, I want to preface that with what I felt were my only coping mechanisms at the time. I thought, you know, sex is what I'm worth. We all talked about that. And it took a very long time to move past that. It took a lot of therapy and finding supportive partners. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but supportive partners have been really key to my healing process.
I think that a person should know, if they know that the person they're being intimate with is a survivor, is where they're at in terms of their sexual health, right? Or mentality regarding their sexuality. I think that that's kind of key to understand, because I think that if somebody's kind of in the beginning stages of recovering from sexual trauma and are still engaging in unhealthy behaviors, that person can actually assist them in engaging in healthier behaviors. So knowing where that person's at, first of all, if they've been told about the sexual abuse, is important. Another thing a person should know is that boundaries are extremely important. You know, crossing over any boundaries or breaking boundaries in terms of sexuality and sexual acts with somebody who is a survivor can actually make us regress, and oftentimes can oftentimes re-traumatize victims. So I think it's really important to, before being intimate with a survivor, to have a really good understanding of both where they're at and what those boundaries are and how to assist them in the process. I think that honestly, if your partner is not willing to do those things, then they're probably not the right person to be with.
I know for me that there's been very few people that knew what happened to me. So, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience, sexual experience with somebody that actually knew what was going on with me. But I do know for me that somebody that sort of gets outside of themselves and their ego, because I think, you know, there's different things when you're having sex, and, you know, if you have a flashback or something like that and you need to stop. To me, it's important that your partner is okay with if you have to stop, or you are crying, or something is going on with you. And so for me, that's been difficult for me to find, because that includes a lot of trust in somebody. And although I feel like I have that now, I didn't really trust anybody with that. And so I think I had a lot of sexual experiences that were not okay. And I was trying to make sure that the other person was okay. So, but I think it's possible if you share with your partner, and that partner is the right person, you know, like you guys have said. But I think that takes a pretty special person that earns a lot of trust from you. So
I actually asked my partner this question before I even started the panel, just because we were talking about a friend of ours who had been assaulted. And I was like, you know, what are some of the things that you think would be important for someone to know? Because we've been together for about 3 years now, and he's been very supportive of my healing process. And his response was that definitely discussing what are your triggers beforehand, you know, talking about what is something that is off limits, like what is something that will freak you out, because if you don't talk about those things, they can't read your mind. And I've really had to learn to speak up for myself. He also said that you know, coming up with a safe word, even if you're not engaging in the kind of sex that you think needs a safe word, as a survivor, sometimes we need that safe word, because sometimes a trigger can get too intense and we need to stop right then. So that's one of the things that he said. I think also just going at the survivor's own pace. So if, let's say I'm having a sexual act and I start to feel uncomfortable, I hope that I can communicate that to my partner, and that's what I've achieved. But learning to sort of speak up for yourself is really not easy. And it took a lot of time to do that. And I think we can all kind of relate to that. I see a lot of nodding heads.
I think that the first step for me was actually addressing it in therapy. So that was step one, addressing it with my therapist and going over. There were so many behaviors that I didn't even realize were hypersexualization or that were coping mechanisms because it was what I'd been used to from a very young age. So it was going to therapy and reframing my entire perception of sexuality and my body and what sex meant to me and what wasn't okay, going over all of that. I think also a decision I just made this year, and I'll be 31 next month, so it's taken a long time, but apart from the therapy has been, I think, predominantly the most influential thing, going through it that way, but this year I set a goal for myself to only give my body to people that I felt truly respected me, actually knew about my trauma, and I believe that I would continue a relationship with. Now, I think to each their own. I'm fully supportive of anyone's sexual preferences, or how many partners they have, or any ways in which they engage sexually. I think that's entirely a personal preference. But for me, that was a huge change because, like, Sarah had mentioned in a previous question, a lot of us have the feeling that we confuse love with sex, and that's what we're brought up to believe. And so I think for some survivors, it might be, like myself, it might be, it might help with a change in perspective of respecting your own body when you're only giving yourself to people who respect you and that have earned the place to be inside of you.
For me, I got to the point where I needed to not have a relationship with that type of relationship, like not have a boyfriend and not have sex, because I spent my life literally going from guy to guy to guy to guy to guy. Like there literally was no time. And because I was always chasing something, I always wanted to feel better than I felt, and wanted to have a better experience than I did with the last guy. And, oh, this guy will love me. And, because I wanted somebody to love me. And if I, wasn't in a relationship and somebody wasn't having sex with me, then I didn't believe I was loved. And so, for like 4 years, actually it wasn't something that I chose to do. It just happened. Like literally it just happened that I didn't have a significant other for 4 years. And, and it's not really like that. I didn't want that. I did, but I feel like the universe just came down and said, you know what, Sarah, you need to chill out and work on yourself. And so in doing that, not being involved with somebody and kind of having that be my life, I was able to look at myself. And but that's what it took. And I don't know how much longer that'll go on for.
Sarah, thank you for sharing. That was really something close to my heart because it's similar to my story. I stopped having sex. Basically, I needed to reset my whole sexuality. So I stopped having sex for a while, and I really started exploring what made me feel good, what was my pleasure. Because when I was having sex before, it was all about the other person and trying to get them to love me. It had nothing to do with what I wanted. I wasn't experiencing pleasure out of it. And I had quite a bit of sex and I didn't enjoy much of it. But when I took that break, and I was able to sort of recalibrate, I came back with a sense of self-worth that I hadn't had before. And then again, with some supportive partners that knew about my experience, it made a world of difference for me. But really taking that break from it was key for me. Again, I think like Jasmyn said, I support everybody's decision to be sexual or not to be sexual. It's everybody's body. But for me, I needed that break.
I have a really good answer to this. And actually doesn't, I have a two-part answer, but one that has nothing to do with sex. With one of my exes, I was with him for years. And I decided one night, when we'd had a few drinks in us, I felt, a little loosened up and ready to tell him my story after, a number of months. And I told him my entire story, which did take some time. I had multiple abusers. And he did sit there and listen the entire time. And after I was done, he said, "Do you want to get something to eat?" And that to me was a huge red flag, because I just felt so like, what just happened? It was it was a red flag from the get-go, that not only was this person not going to want to hear and want to know about those parts of me, but a red flag also that he wouldn't respect my boundaries sexually. And that's exactly what happened. So I would say from the beginning, if you're going to enter a relationship and, and build that trust with somebody and trust them enough to share your story, if they're not willing to listen or actually engage in that conversation, that's a red flag in and of itself. And then the second part to my answer would be, other experiences that I've had, red flags to look out for are people who don't respect your boundaries, or this is a huge one, who take things personally when you're triggered. That is not a personal thing. And I see there's another question that we're going to go over. But taking it personally and making you feel bad when you are triggered is a huge red flag. That is a relationship I would encourage anybody who is a survivor to get out of immediately, because that will continue. And the last thing that any of us need is any more guilt or bad feelings over our abuse.
Yeah, for me, I can relate to a lot of what Jasmyn said. I sort of know when I meet somebody, and when I'm trying to get to know them and stuff like that, whether or not I feel comfortable enough to even share that part of me with them. Because if I'm not able to do that, I know that that's not going to be something that's going to work out. And then I would be, back in my self-destructive thing, because I'm trying to take care of somebody else instead of myself. And so I don't have a lot of experience with a partner that understands. So I think most of my red flags would just be like, things that Jasmyn said. Not taking things personally. I mean, I know what I would do in that situation. Talk to the person. And hopefully you guys can agree that you kind of know by the way the person is, and so I taking things personally for me is the biggest thing. And, if I want to stop having sex, then I want to stop having sex. And if that's not okay with somebody, then you need to leave immediately. But I sort of know that, I mean, at this point, I know what I have to do in order to not be treated the way that I've allowed myself to be treated. And so if I'm getting in a situation where there's a bunch of red flags, then I myself haven't taken care of myself. It's not necessarily that person, it's me, not listening to the red flags before I even have sex with somebody, and if I just, like, let's say, I'm not saying that I do this anymore. I go into a bar and have sex with somebody, I'm asking for a bunch of red flags, and so I think the red flags for me are not necessarily for the person that I'm going to possibly be with. It's really, how am I acting, and am I taking care of myself in order to have an experience that I should be having and I deserve to have.
So I keep talking about boundaries. I feel like I've said the word boundary a million times. But I would say a red flag for me would be somebody who we have discussed a boundary and they cross that boundary. That's a huge red flag. Taking it personally, if I say you have crossed a boundary, huge red flag. Another big red flag is not listening when you say no. I mean, I know that seems obvious, but sometimes you can be in the midst of a sex act and you can say, I'm not comfortable with this, and the person doesn't listen. That is a big red flag because, I mean, obviously, that's going to lead to more sexual abuse. And I wish that I had known those things when I was younger. I definitely wish that. I do want to touch on listening to your intuition. I think we all kind of talked a little bit about that, but if you have a voice inside of you that is telling you something's not right, listen to it. I think as women, we've been told, oh, we have to be polite, we can't be rude, don't want to hurt this person's feelings. Be rude if you have to be. It's okay. I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is it's okay to say no, and it's okay to be rude if I need to be.
I have experienced triggers during sexual moments. It They are hard to handle. I think no matter how far along in the process you are, unless you're the partner who has worked through those things with you and who is used to the process and knows how to respond to it. So I can think of 3 different times I've had triggers during sexual experiences, and I kind of in each of the situations I freaked out. Either I said no very loudly, or I pulled away, or I started crying. Um, with all of those experiences, I handled them the same way, and it all turned out pretty well. And I think the first thing that I went over was, this has to do with my experience. This has nothing to do with you. Please do not take it personally, and I need a moment. And it's always a shock, right? And for anybody who's on the receiving end of that, it's going to be shocking for them because they're going to feel like they did something wrong initially. But as long as they understand, then okay, this has nothing to do with me. This has to do with their past, and what's happened to them. I need to be respectful. So after I take some space, I do ask to be comforted, and then I go through that scenario with that person, and I ask them, do you want to know why that was a trigger for me or not? Because sometimes people don't owe me, because sexual assault experiences are so disturbing. I don't think that your partner always owes you the courtesy of listening to every single detail, because I have learned over my experiences that it does. I've had a partner throw up after hearing about an experience of mine. And so I don't think that they necessarily owe that to you, but I always leave it open to them, right? To either, do you want to know what happened that caused that? And if not, if so, I will tell them. If not, then I will say, okay, well, this is what you please can avoid moving forward is, touching me in this way or kissing me in this way, or, whatever it may be, so that doesn't happen again. And that's how I've navigated that. And it's gone fairly well in my experience.
For some reason, I feel like the younger ladies on this panel are much more mature than I am. No, I think what you just said was great. So like in the past 4 years, I haven't been in a relationship, and so I can only talk about my previous experiences. And yes, I was triggered a lot, but in order for me to have sex, I was inebriated in some way. And so if it had, if I was triggered, or if I had a flashback or something like that, I was either too drunk or whatever. And I would just keep doing it, mostly because I didn't want to upset the other person. And I think for me, the endless searching for somebody who was not going to treat me like crap just led me down this road of, sexual experiences with triggers and doing things I didn't want to do, until I finally just, I couldn't do it anymore. Well, actually, it was the universe gave it to me. So, but yeah, I can't really talk about how, anybody, a partner, what they did, because I didn't have that experience with anybody. I mean, as far as, somebody knowing about my.
Okay, so do I still have triggers? Yeah, I do. I don't know that they ever go away completely. I think you learn how to deal with them. And I think they do get better with time. I've noticed that, I'm not as triggered as I used to be. Sometimes simply cuddling would trigger me and I would have to stop, and that was no way to live my life. And I quickly realized when I couldn't even cuddle with my partner that something was up. Like I needed to make a change. So when I have a trigger now, what I do is I try to ground myself. So I try to deep breathe and try to stay inside my body. I try not to dissociate because sometimes when I get a trigger, it feels like I leave my body, which is a very common thing amongst sexual assault survivors. So I know I'm definitely not alone in that. But it doesn't make it any easier sometimes. Um, but I think we've all said some really like profound things about triggers and how to deal with them. So I feel like I'm just repeating what we've said already. So I'll just stop.
So I have a unique experience in that, one, as a person, I'm extremely outgoing, I'm comfortable, I'm confrontational, I'm assertive, I'm a lawyer. And so I've also been with the district attorney's office for 4 years now. And so the answer for me is absolutely, and here's why. I do want to just touch on this briefly. Sex crimes are more common than so many other crimes, but people are so uncomfortable talking about them, and I'm very committed to breaking the stigma surrounding sexual assault. It happens so often, and people don't feel like they can talk about it because it makes people feel uncomfortable. What bothers me is how many people engage in watching television shows, crime shows that talk about dismemberment, murder, murder of children even, and that's okay to talk about, but rape and sexual assault aren't. So, in general, I am very open about my experience. I will tell people straight off the bat that I am a survivor. Not when I meet them. Hi, I'm Jasmyn, and I'm a survivor. But I absolutely will disclose it to my partner pretty much right when I start dating them, because I've also, I involve myself with the Survivor Tribe and the RAIN Network and other organizations that assist with sexual assault. So I'm very involved in the world of sexual assault and recovery and survivors. So that being the case, it's easy for me to discuss that with partners, but I usually will tell them that I am a survivor. And like I touched on in the last question, it's hard for some people to listen to all the details, especially when, for a lot of us, the details are extremely gruesome if you really, really get into them, right? And there's different ways. I'm sure every survivor knows there's different ways to tell your story. For instance, you can say, I was raped. You can say that I was raped while I was unconscious. And with every detail, it becomes more and more disturbing. So what I try to do is just gauge their comfort level and tell them what I feel like they are ready to hear. And usually what I get is a response of, yes, I do want to hear. They don't want to get too far into detail until they're more prepared for that. And eventually over time, we do have those conversations. So that's how I approach that conversation before being intimate with anybody. I am unlike other survivors, though, in that I don't really have sex with strangers. I don't have one night stands. I don't have casual sex. And that, again, great on anybody who does. There's absolutely no judgment. Everybody is entitled to their own sexual behavior and sexuality. But for me, that hasn't been an issue. So I can't answer to how I would approach that with somebody who I didn't already have somewhat of a relationship with.
I've never told, maybe that's not true. The only way that I would ever tell anybody is, like I said on an earlier question, is I need to get to know somebody. I don't trust people. Like, people have to earn my trust. And because for a while now, I try to not get myself into situations like a one night stand or whatever. Because to me, that's just putting me in a situation where I'm going to get hurt. Especially, if I have to do something and I have to self-medicate to do it, then I know that it's not the right thing to do. And I'm certainly not going to tell somebody in that situation. There's a couple of boyfriends, I guess, that I've had that in the past, I used to tell my story kind of matter of factly, like it was a story. I was just telling a story about what happened, and up until about a couple of years ago. And so I really don't want to start crying. I'm such not a crier. And so it's been it's been difficult. And yes, I told these people, but it wasn't in a way that I was even feeling anything. So I do know that if I get into another relationship, that I have to trust the person fully and have the discussion with them, and take it slowly. And it's just my choice. It's my choice whether or not I want to act out, or whether or not I want to try to have a relationship that's good for myself and good for the other person. And so I'm happy to answer this question sometime in the future when I have more experience with it.
So ideally, yes, I would tell my sex partner that I am a survivor so that we can discuss what makes me comfortable and that kind of thing. So that's the ideal, but that's not always realistic. I wish that I had been more open and upfront with my current partner. The way that he found out I had been abused was, it was the first night we spent together. He was supposed to be a one night stand. This was when I was still hypersexualizing myself. And I woke up from a PTSD nightmare crying. And so then I had to explain to him why I was sobbing and hyperventilating. That is not the way I wanted to tell him. And that's not the way I went I didn't go forward with any other partners because he and I hit it off. But if I did, I would try to really be more upfront about it, because I want to be in control of my narrative. I don't want to be overly emotional while I'm talking about it, because like Jasmyn was saying, it makes people uncomfortable sometimes. And while I'm not looking to make sure that other people are comfortable just for their comfort, I do care about what my current partner or what any partner would be feeling when I'm telling them something that has happened to me.
I think I touched on this in a previous question, but where I'm at in life and with my recovery and healing is I'm at a place where I'm looking with a sexual partner. I'm looking for somebody, with a sexual encounter. I'm looking for somebody who really respects me and my body and my past and my future. I spent a lot of my life hypersexualizing myself as a result of my abuse, and I think that I gave myself too freely. And again, I viewed my body and my sexuality as separate from me as a person, and so that's the most important thing to me right now. That could change as time goes on, but for right now, it's been it's been a rewarding year for me to only give myself in that way. And I'm learning a great deal from it.
A partner? Just kidding. Sorry. I couldn't do this without a little bit of sarcasm. For me, I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. I need to have a relationship with somebody. I need to, like, a real one, somebody who knows me and I've told them these things about me, and not in a way where I'm telling a story. And somebody that doesn't leave when, because that's always a possibility, that somebody doesn't want to be with you because you're a survivor and it's hard for them to deal with, for whatever reason that is. you know, and I also find guys to be not very good communicators. And so I definitely need to have a partner that is willing to communicate and have a dialogue about what's good for me, what's good for him, what's good for us, that type of thing. And I'm not saying like, you know, I'm going to meet somebody and 10 years down the line, I'll finally have sex with them because I've worked all these things out. Because I don't think, you know, realistically things work that way. But for me, I just need to not put myself in situations that are going to continually damage me. And so, you know, if I'm out looking for a sex partner, you know, to go have sex, that's not what I need. It may be something that I want to do sometime, but you know, what I need is to take the time to, you know, develop a healthy relationship. For me, I need to have a healthy relationship, and not necessarily and that's not necessarily me convincing myself that it's healthy. You know, I have to bounce these things off of other people, therapists and friends and stuff like that, because I don't necessarily make the best choices. And so it, you know, for me, it's just somebody that is going to treat me the way that I want to be treated, that I deserve to be treated. And we have good communication.
So what I look for in a sexual encounter now is trust and pleasure. I'm finally starting to really enjoy having sex again, because I've done a lot of work. I'm not going to sell myself short. I've done a lot of work. But I definitely look for someone who I can trust, someone who respects me. And I want to keep the focus on, this sounds real selfish, but I want to keep the focus on me for a little bit. Like the focus has been on other people for so much of my sexuality and so much of my sex life, that keeping the focus on what I find pleasurable and what is good for me, that's what I look for now.
I think words of wisdom would come from me first is that it does get better. And I know that's a cliche saying, but it's said for a reason. It does get better with time, and that there's absolutely a route to recovery. And many of us have gone down that path and have recovered successfully and have very happy and healthy sex lives with respectful, healthy partners. And so I'd encourage anybody who is going through any issues with their sex life because of sexual abuse to start figuring out different ways in which you can address that. Because I'm sure many of us have heard that quote that, you know, the trauma that you experienced, you're not responsible for, but you are responsible for your healing. And you know, that can come from therapy, it can come from books, it can come from friends, it can come from just working with things, you know, one on one with your intimate partner. But whatever it may be, start engaging in that, and you know, work your way into a happy, healthy sex life, because it really changes everything.
I think the most important thing that I would suggest, or of course I can't come up with the word now. I think it's important for anyone to take care of themselves and get to a point where they feel healthy to have a healthy sexual experiences. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't think people should have sex, but I think you know, I think if somebody, you know, if my life had been different, you know, and over the last several decades of my sex life, if I'd known that it was okay that I took care of myself and that I mattered, and I don't have to make sure that other people are okay, that would have been important for me. And that if I get into a situation that you know, I end up not wanting to be in, that I can stop. You know, I just think it's important for us to be at a place where we have reclaimed our power. You know, because for me, I just gave it away constantly. Because that's the only thing I knew how to do. And so I think there's little steps that everybody can take along the path of having, you know, having a healthy sex life. But I think it's important to do those things, you know. I mean, like I said, I wasn't even able to really even look at or say, you know, say the things out loud. And so, you know, I would have liked somebody to say, hey, you know, for the next 20 years, this is what you need to work on. But, you know, I'm slowly trying to regain my power. And I think that's important for anybody.
My words of wisdom for Survivor would be, it's totally possible to have a healthy sex life and a good sex life after abuse. But it does take work and it does take time. And healing is not linear. Sometimes we're doing great and other times we're not doing so great. But that doesn't mean your healing has stopped. So, you know, a trigger might crop up again that you thought you'd figured out, and it might be there again, or a new one might come up, and you've got to learn to deal with it as it goes. But I would just say be gentle with yourself. Healing is hard and messy work, but it's possible.
Hi, my name is Jasmyn and I'm a survivor.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is Ashleigh and I'm a survivor.